All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. We'll begin with apologies for absence, for which I'll hand over to Lucy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Received apologies from Councillor Coyne and Councillor Hunt is substituting. Apologies from Councillor Clares, we've substituted Councillor Ligo. Apologies for Councillor Tidball, Councillor Pressel substituting, and apologies from Councillor Pegg with Councillor Muddymud substituting.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Item 2, any declarations of interest anybody would like to make? I'm not seeing anybody, so I'll move along. Item 3, Chair. No, sorry, I didn't notice.
Just for clarity, I'm also a county councillor and I'm a cabinet member as well for public housing qualities, and also on the cabinet making the decisions on some of the highways stuff as well. So just for clarity.
Thank you. Nobody else? Right. Okay. Item 3, Chair's announcements. I shall all be glad to know that I have no announcements. Item 4, the minutes. Would anybody like to make any comments on minutes of the previous meeting? Again, I'm seeing none. So in that case, I assume we're all happy with them as they stand. Okay. Item 5, work plan and forward plan. So we've got the September, October and November scrutiny meetings to plan. So for September, we've got a few candidate items. So first of all, the ones which I think are practical certainties that we would wish to consider at the September scrutiny. This is the ordinary September scrutiny, separate from the extraordinary one, which is to do with Oxfordshire 2050. At the ordinary September scrutiny, I'd have thought we'd be practically certain to want to look at Oxford Local Plan 2040 Reg 18 consultation. And I'd have also thought we'd be practically certain to want to look at the transport core schemes, Oxford City Council's position, since obviously that's a big ticket item and something that people are very likely to have views on. Am I hearing any objections so far that those are things which I'd have thought we do want to be on the September agenda? Please, yes.
Are we voting for the panel, the climate emergency? No, in September. No, the membership. Yeah, sorry.
Not at this point. No, sorry.
Yeah, that's what the question was I was asking. Would it be going to be in a September meeting?
Yeah, so it's planned that that'll come to either the September or if not the October meeting. We just need to work up the scope as agreed at the last meeting.
Okay, right. Okay, so hearing no objections to those two big ticket items going on. So then the question for the September meeting is whether we wish to try to consider a third thing. Now, those are obviously both quite large items. Two possible candidates I'd have thought we probably don't want to consider are CCTV at Gloucester Green and the lease for 16 and 17 Turl Street on grounds of those being sort of relatively small in scope. One that is perhaps a candidate and which I believe Lizzie wanted to put a case for is the lease of the council office accommodation at St Aldate's. Do you want to sort of briefly say, because I know you said that by email that you'd want to consider that?
I mean, I think partly just because I don't anticipate it taking up too much time, but I think it could be something that will be interesting for the committee to cover. And if it comes to committee and it turns out that there isn't that much for us to scrutinise, then there isn't. But I think it would be best to include it in case there's, it ends up being something that is really something that we'd want to look at as a committee, but I'm open to other opinions.
So I just thought, yeah, we sort of want to consider that it's potentially interesting, and against the fact that obviously the local plan is a very big ticket item, and the transport core schemes, I honestly have no picture in my head as to whether that's likely to be a half-hour discussion or like a 90-minute marathon. So yeah, I'd like to have views from the committee about hearing or not hearing this third item about the leasing and St Aldate's.
Just to say, I think the lettings policy for that space would be an interesting thing to consider. When I stepped down as a cabinet member, it was still a work in progress, and it obviously I'm sure members will have views on what sort of use what sort of organisations we want in that space, all subject obviously to being able to bring in the projected income for the council.
Councillor Pressel?
I suggest that the transport core schemes will be at least 90 minutes and probably much, much longer.
Okay, so one all so far, which is not helping too much to resolve my indecision on the matter. Anyone else got a view on this? Doesn't seem that way, in which, yeah, please, Councillor Ligo.
I know you got the grant allocations there, and is it there because it's going to cabinet for a decision? Because that might be suggested to go on to the next one because it's quite a chunky agenda.
What's the full title of the item, sorry?
Grant allocations to community and voluntary organisations.
Yes.
So that's why it's there. Okay.
This is the one that, sorry, I'm hearing it slipped in November, so probably be considered at the November meeting. Okay, right. In that case, if this is where we are on the matter, I suppose I'm inclined to err on the side of more scrutiny rather than less, at the risk of potentially exhausting people. And at the very least, it will give us an incentive to wrap up the discussion about the transport core schemes, because an awful lot of ink will be spilled on the matter, I'm certain, at this committee and everywhere else. So in that case, if the committee is pleased, I would suggest that we do include the leasing item and perhaps encourage the people involved to come in via Zoom, so that we're not, taking up an awful lot of their time. I hear no objections to that, in which case let's move on to the October cabinet items. So again, we've got a couple that are sort of matters of part of the policy framework and therefore very likely to go in. So we've got the procurement strategy 2022 to 2025 coming up for then. And we've also got the West End and Osney Mead SPD coming up for then. And then we have a smorgasbord of possible third candidates. So to quickly knock off the ones I thought we probably wouldn't want, there's the appointment of a contractor for the Oxpens River Bridge. Again, fairly small in scope in that it's the specifics of allocating engineering tasks rather than the principle of the matter. And the other one was the, I think it actually might now disappear. There was an item that was going to go to, oh, that was it, sorry. It was the joint venture LLP relating to the South Oxford Science Village. But I'm advised that this is largely about sort of financial technicalities at this stage, rather than about the sort of the big strategic picture of city planning, the kind of things that we might want to be more involved in. So candidates that remain is Botley Road Retail Park Development Brief, looking for endorsement from the Cabinet about potential development on that site away from retail, potentially interesting in a city planning sense. And also the Oxfordshire Food Strategy Action Plan, which is something that we missed out the previous time. I'd like to make a suggestion here, which is that the food strategy might be a good one to consider. And that's because we've obviously got some big ticket planning items here for both September and October, whereas the food strategy is something which I'd have ideally liked to get on our agenda at the previous meeting, but which was bumped because there was a lot of stuff happening at the time. So we missed out on the sort of the strategy itself, and this is its accompanying action plan, which gives us an opportunity to also sort of look a little backwards at the strategy itself as well. So my suggestion would be that we add the food strategy as a third item there. But again, I'd like to hear any opinions from the committee. Councillor Ligo.
Sorry, just it goes back to declarations of interest as well. I also was involved with the food strategy at the council and got signed off. We got some national recognition, and we also give all the districts divided the money, £250,000. So just thought to mention that at the start. I don't know.
Fair enough. Would you like to subject yourself to scrutiny on that decision?
Actually, another district's asked if I could come along to one of their scrutiny committees. If you want me to come along, I mean, each district is tweaked their own version, but it's entirely up to you. I'm leave it up to the committee.
Anyone else want to come in on this? Lizzie?
Just that I agree with you to give another sort of vote in favour.
Okay, in which case, hearing no other opinions, if it is agreeable to people, in October, we will consider the procurement strategy, the West End and Osneymead SPD, and the Oxfordshire Food Strategy Action Plan. Agreed? Agreed. Fantastic. All right. And then there's also November, but the only thing that we've got on the slate at the moment is grant allocations, as Councillor Ligo mentioned earlier. We're essentially waiting for the work plan to progress that far forward. So I suggest we revisit that at the next scrutiny. Okay. There is only one other thing then on this agenda item, which is scrutiny commissioned work. We have the covered market site visit coming up. The dates offered for that having been the Thursdays 22nd and 29th of September. I've seen a lot of email traffic back and forth about that one, so I think most people have responded to that, and I appreciate various regular scrutiny members aren't present. If there's anybody present that hasn't already responded to that to express interest or express date preferences, please do so ASAP so that they can make a decision as to which date we're going for and make the organizations required. And then finally, water quality in waterways. This is about inviting a representative from Thames Water, the Environment Agency, and Thames 21 to present data and to answer questions. I'm not too clear what we need to do with that at this point, though.
So it's just noting that we now have our new scrutiny officer in post, and he will schedule that into the work programme as he sort of establishes in the role.
Cool, fantastic. In which case, unless we have any comment on either of those things, we can move along to the asset strategy, asset management strategy. I don't see any hands. So you think? Yeah, I don't see any hands raised, in which case I suggest we move along. Let's talk asset management, and I will hand over to Councillor Turner in the first instance to introduce the item.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, and apologies for the slightly unusual sort of cameo. I'll keep my introductory remarks very brief because I'm not sure exactly where scrutiny wanted to go with this. But suffice to say, a good amount of work has gone into this. At the same time, it's a high level piece of work, and there will be another document sitting underneath it, which can say a little bit more about the, I suppose, the operational side of the way we run our assets and add a bit more granularity. It covers a wide amount of scope, which of course it needs to because of the wide variety of assets that we hold. In the current circumstances, we need to manage our assets well. We of course need to work particularly hard on making sure that income comes in, which is owed to the council, and indeed, if anything, we want to try to increase the level of income, certainly try to reduce the impacts of the COVID pandemic as much as we possibly can. At the same time, there are other assets which fulfill other very important corporate goals for us. For example, the community assets that we hold. And I think the strategy sets out quite well how we intend to do that. I'll hand over to officers, but really I think in all of this, I'd probably want to be guided by members about where you want to take the discussion. So leave officers to sort of fill in any gaps and look forward to what people have got to say.
Ms. Winfield.
Hi, I just wanted to add that obviously the asset management plan itself has been signed off by Cabinet in December and came to scrutiny committee before that. So the process has been, once that was signed off, we went out to public consultation, and so now it's post public consultation. It's now coming back to Cabinet to be adopted.
Thank you very much. Okay, unless we have any other introductory remarks, then in that case, I'd like to seek questions, comments, and recommendations from anybody that wishes to bring them up. I'll come to Altaf first and then go clockwise around the room.
My question is regarding consultation. In this document, it says that this strategy, only one person replied, and previously a comparison was a 0. So there's quite a lot improvement from 0 to 1. And in the previous economic strategy, where the leader of council was present, and she also recognized certain communities were not even at all single person. So are the portfolio holder officers satisfied or happy that this consultation or the talking or communication with the people is has the right channels, and we are satisfied with the numbers?
Mike, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I'll come in on that. I think, yeah, bottom line is we were very disappointed with the response. I think we sent it out specifically to 180 different organisations and parties across Oxford, including most of our tenant base in the commercial portfolio. And obviously it was also live on the council's consultation portfolio for a month, to allow anybody else who was interested to come along and look at the strategy and what we were recommending. It was very disappointing, nobody, but it is a very strategic document. It is long and it is quite technical in parts. So, and it doesn't sort of tick some of the buttons you would say the customers or constituents kind of on the ground might kind of have kind of at the top of their agenda. It's not hitting the pounds in their pocket sort of questions, and so I think there was a lack of response. But yeah, it was disappointing that we didn't get that response because we worked hard to get it.
Councillor Turner?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably need to be a bit realistic about this one. So as Mike says, this is a pretty high level strategic document. I think if you got to a point where you had particular decisions that people might be concerned about. So for example, let's say we were going to change the way our estate shops worked, just as an example. And you know, we might run them in a different way, something like that. Then clearly we would expect to engage with people who shop at estate shops, people who own or have a lease on estate shops, and we'd engage at that moment. I think a wide-ranging, high-level strategic document, realistically, is probably never going to sort of fly off the shelves in terms of consultation. So, and the key thing will be if there are decisions that come forward under the strategy, to make sure we get it right in those individual instances.
Ms. Winfield?
Yeah, just finally to say that we did have a consultant working with us on this, who's been working with other authorities on putting together asset management plans and strategies, and it's safe to say that he was not surprised by the lack of response. I think that it is, as Councillor Turner said, quite a dry document that doesn't get people's juices flowing. So it was interesting that this mirrors you know, the response in other areas.
Thank you. Councillor Pressel, are you on the same topic? Or?
Yes, I want
yes,
to
okay.
follow on from
Please.
that. Have you considered doing the consultation differently? For instance, you could take the district shops bit and you could kind of break it down, and like you did a bit towards the end in the action plan, I think it was, you said some of the things you might be doing, and that's much more kind of attractive to people, and it would invite comments, I think. So if you kind of put it together in a different package, just that section about district shops, and sent it to all the people who are renting shops from us at the moment, I bet you would have got a much better response, and it would have been helpful to us
Ed?
We did send
Sorry.
it to all of the, we did send it to all of the tenants of those shops, although we didn't send the individual parts. I think the difficulty with consultation on this is when I kind of listed down kind of all of the points and all of the sort of sections and sort of bits and pieces that are in the plan, there is probably 100 to 150 kind of individual items that you could consult on each one, and you'd have a kind of target catchment for each of those items that would be different. It would be a very, very cumbersome process. Not to say you can't do it, but it would be extremely cumbersome. And as I say, whether you would still get some response is still open to some question.
Did you want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, just to again maybe reassure Susanna and others that I think if there are decisions which come forward, because I don't see this as being a document that takes lots and lots of new decisions for the council. If there are decisions that come forward, then we clearly must involve the relevant people. And I think Susanna is spot on in what she says, that when you've got something which is a discrete, clear issue, then that's the moment at which people feel most inclined to engage. And just to be clear as well, I don't want to set hairs running just with my little example about estate shops. We're not at the moment planning to make any changes to estate shops. I was just flagging that as a particular area where the document talks about how it's one where in time you might take a different approach, and that would then be the moment that we'd engage people a little bit more. I think we should make more of this document, to be honest, than what it is.
Thank you. Okay, Altaf, did you have anything else to come up with, or otherwise I'll move on? Pardon me, sir? Okay, yes, please, Councillor Belly-Summers.
Yes, it's about the same question. I wondered who were this 180 organization, and does it involve a parish council? Does it involve community organizations? And I just wondered why people were not many more people were responding. So at a time when a lot of people have got ADHD, attention deficit disorder, I wonder why this kind of document can be more user friendly. If it's anything less than the document we are provided for, or we have to read as councillor, it's quite cut and dry, and there's a lot and pages to read. But for the general public who might be interested in this, I wonder if it can be put in kind of more digestible way and make more efforts in that.
Who would like to come back?
So we did. Go on, Councillor Turner.
Jane or Mike could probably say a bit more about the individual organisations. I think we're all committed to making a real effort with consultation involving people. I think the thing you need to judge is whether you do that over this particular corporate document or whether you do that at other kind of moments in the process. So again, I mean, let me just give you, another example. Again, maybe that helps. At different stages, we've been working a lot on the covered market, thinking about how, what the covered market should look like in the future. Are there ways in which we can change its operation to make it more successful? What sort of works do we need to do there? A whole range of things. And then, you have different action plans, letting strategies and so on coming forward. And we engage really intensively, and dare I say it, sometimes quite successfully on those. And there's lots of interest from the public and from traders and so on. I'd much rather we did we expended our effort and did stuff which was really good on those kind of discrete pieces of work, rather than necessarily trying to set lots of strands of work running on this overarching corporate document. So I think we're completely agreed on the end, which is people being involved, and when people are involved, going to be affected by the outcome of a decision, that they ought to have the opportunity to shape that decision. I'm not sure that this document is the right place, would have been the right place to have done that. But of course, you can't be sure. So it went out for consultation, and we are where we are. Jay, maybe you could say, or Mike could say a little bit more about who did have the opportunity to comment on this, apart from regular readers of our website, even if they in the end chose not to.
Yeah, as I said, I think there was over 180 parties we went out to, which was a large part of our commercial tenant base, got copies and got invited to the consultation. We circulated it to the surrounding district councils and Oxfordshire County Council. We included on the list the Oxford University and other kind of major land users within the kind of Oxford city kind of area. So that was the broad spectrum of kind of where our focus in terms of the consultation sat as it went out.
Thank you.
Parish council? Parish council?
Parish councils were not actually, we didn't go down to parish council level.
That was a why not off the mic, sorry.
Why not, Mike?
We weren't, as I say, we pulled this together with the team in consultation, and as I say, they gave us a list of kind of councils to include on the list, which didn't include the parishes, I think, and I must admit that's probably, yeah, an oversight that maybe we should have pushed that out to the parish councils as well.
I think so. Thank you very much.
Should we set that down as a recommendation that to the next generation of the plan, the parish councils ought to be on the list of consultees?
I have one more. I have one more point on this.
Sorry, I'll come to Ed first, and then I'll come to Councillor Madiman.
Yeah, just on the parishes. I mean, I think it's just worth being aware of the scope of this particular document. I mean, if there's any document ever that parish councils want to feed into, then that's great. We should share it, and of course also, members of council get all of the papers, everything. People see everything that goes out to consultation from the cabinet, and if people want to feed in and say, actually, I think others ought to be consulted about this, we'll really welcome that feedback. In all honesty, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe there'd be individual sections people might be interested in, but again, I stress this is a pretty high-level corporate document. I'm just not sure that this is something where really parishes would maybe they want to engage with it. I think the key point, though, again, it applies to parish councils as everyone else, is if, for example, let's say, another example, we're looking at our assets, some of our community assets in Old Marston or in Littlemore, and we run a consultation about what we're doing with those. That then is the moment when we absolutely need to engage the parish councils and all of the stakeholders, rather than necessarily with this particular corporate document. But if Scrutiny feels like we've got the balance wrong and there is likely to be more interest in this document, then happy days, and we'll certainly bear it in mind for future iterations.
I'll come to Councillor Muddyman, and then I suggest that we should probably move on from the topic of consultation and see what other sort of top level topics we've got on hand. Councillor Muddyman, please.
I would just like to suggest that I think it's really important that local communities and stakeholders are involved at this high level stage before it gets down into the granularity of the detail, because by the time it gets to that point, quite a lot of things can't be changed because they've been set within the high level strategy. So I would like to recommend that perhaps this could be taken out by, you've got expert officers as your community teams, and I'm sure they will be able to find really creative and digestible ways to take a high level document like this to the relevant stakeholders in a very creative and digestible way.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, it is. I agree with Councillor Pressel. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, Councillor Ligo, and then let's really move along.
Yeah, sorry, just very quickly, and it might be something that the parish council forum, so it might be, was it 4-6 times a year, it might be something that actually is put on the agenda there for any consultations that's going on within the council, that they're just updated when that's going on. So that's another platform so they can be kept aware.
It sounds highly plausible to me. Probably if we were to recommend it, and it sounds broadly speaking like we're inclined to do so, then we should possibly leave open exactly how that is done, and simply note that involvement of bringing the topic to the awareness of parish and community councils would be a positive step for future years. Can I ask if anybody has any other top level topics that they'd like to raise at all?
Our recommendation? Is that a recommendation what you made? The parish council and the forum parish council.
That was my intention, if people are happy.
And sorry, just quickly, and it is up to us as councillors also to share this information as well.
Okay, would anybody like to come in on a new topic? Councillor Rowley.
I agree with the report that the asset management strategy isn't an appropriate report to have an EIA, because an EIA is environmental impact assessment is as set in the law, is very much a task and finish thing for a specific project. However, is there a way, a mechanism by which the overall environmental impact of the council's asset management function is monitored? And if not, do portfolio holders and those responsible think that there could be?
I'd like to come in. Anybody want to comment on environmental management? Ms. Winfield, please.
So yes, stemming from the asset management action plan that sits underneath this, there will be various work strands that look at the overarching environmental impact. You know, so we might have carbon reduction as one, we might have biodiversity as another. So absolutely, we are looking at ways to start to capture that performance.
Anybody else want to come in with any questions or comments?
Yes, please.
Councillor Muddyman, please.
Given that the council is currently drafting a new economic strategy, which will have a triple bottom line framework to ensure that social and environmental outcomes are given equal credence to economic outcomes, can you tell me whether that has already been applied to this document? If you go through this document, have social and environmental outcomes been given equal credence to economic outcomes?
Mike, can you answer that question easily?
I don't think I can answer it easily. I think we were aware from consultation around the economic strategy and the direction of travel. Obviously, it wasn't finalised and in a kind of form that we could kind of cast it in the way that it's now being stated. So yes, this document is slightly behind that, and we have not gone back and revisited the document to kind of align and make sure that it does align with that kind of environmental and etc.
But I think it's fair to say though, Mike, isn't it, that we've got different properties that fulfil different functions for the council. So we've got our investment portfolio, which is around income provision, and then clearly we've got different assets that provide stronger social benefits and very little economic benefit.
Yeah, and that's reflected in the document, which was really, what I was trying to say was, there are all these assets. We've had regard to the economic strategy, and we've kept kind of strands for all of those activities. What we haven't done is probably just added them all up and said, have we given equal balance, and could there be a moderate shift? But most of this is very strategic in nature, as has been said all the way through, and it will be when we get into the individual projects. So if we do decide to go ahead with a project to relook at our community centres or whatever, and their function and role and how they operate, at that point we would be looking at how does any new strategy or structure that comes out of that piece of work impact on these areas, and are we giving it equal weight? It's really at the detail when this comes into play. The strategy is a more generic document which plays all strands.
Ed, you want to come in?
Yes, I would.
Councillor Sanders.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. And apologies, by the way, for being briefly off screen and moving where I was sitting. So, I mean, just to be clear, this has been quite some while in the making, and of course was interrupted by the pandemic, and we certainly aren't going to, you've never finished a strategy if you sort of complete alignment with everything else being worked on. But I think it absolutely is about balancing the things that Lois talked about and more, you know, and that's why our kind of corporate priorities are absolutely reflected in the document. And I think Jane's right as well to point to the different purposes of different bits of our portfolio. So, you know, one area this document is particularly focused on is our commercial portfolio. You know, the clue there is in the name. We need to get in our commercial rents from our commercial portfolio to fund our services. If we take out our commercial income, then frankly, we don't have much of a council left. We would be, you know, in a very distressing area because we absolutely rely on that to fund the rest of our services. And of course, particularly, we focus on discretionary services for things that we really care about. So, you know, we don't have a kind of legal obligation to do as much as we do in combating the climate emergency. We don't have a legal obligation to provide the Youth Ambition programme. We don't have a legal obligation to provide community centres in the way that we do, but we do provide those things, and they come in significant part because we run a commercial property portfolio that's ship-shape. On the other hand, we also have assets like our housing assets, which includes in the name. They provide people with a home, like our community centres, our leisure centres, where the objective isn't commercial. And I think when you look at what we're doing in the round, then it absolutely pays respect to the whole ambit of things reflected in our corporate priorities. Ultimately, it's for members to judge whether this document gets the balance right. I've not heard any suggestions that it's out of kilter at the moment.
Councillor Muddyman, do you want to follow up?
Yes, I would say that having read the document, my sense is that the economic priorities are not equal with the social and environmental. And I think Mike suggested the same thing just now. So I wonder whether it's possible to recommend that you go back and review it and just check that those three things are equal.
Can I ask, were there any specific points within the document where it sort of, you know, were there particular topics where it sort of leapt out at you that there was a particular consideration missing, or is it more of an overall thing?
I think it's a general view of the entire document. I don't know whether other councillors agree with me or not.
Anybody else want to? Yeah, sorry, I've got Lizzie. You want to come in?
I mean, I think without any further clarity on exactly what you mean in any particular points where you think that's the case, it's hard to come back on that. But I think this is fundamentally a strategy, I guess. I mean, I'm hoping someone else can jump in if I get something wrong, because this is not my area of expertise, but about how we can manage a lot of our assets, which are, you know, economic assets, in order to enable the council to have as much sort of revenue, I guess, in some ways as possible, in order to fulfill our environmental and social functions, most of which cost money. So I'm not sure that this is going to be balanced in the sense of talking about all the things equally, but that's, I don't think, what we mean by balance in this context. And I think actually throughout the strategy, we're talking about ways, you know, in a strategy that is largely an economic strategy, we're talking about different things we're doing that are a bit more holistic in terms of, for example, managing our community centres and the good things we're doing there to provide, you know, flexibility and make sure those are fit for purpose and functional. But I think, you know, without putting words in his mouth, what Councillor Turner was sort of saying is, you know, without a successful and, you know, asset management strategy, there isn't much else we can do to do all the fantastic other things that we do as a council. I hope that makes sense. So I mean, I don't, and I think if we view this in, you know, it's a high level document, if we view this in conjunction with all of the other things that it sits among, I think as a council, I would say we're, you know, achieving that balance. I think if there's a particular point where you feel like in this strategy, one element is being prioritized over another, that's a discussion we could have as a committee. But I don't think we can just turn around and say we think the entire strategy is unbalanced without having specific points to back that up, or without, you know, viewing it as part of the wider body of work that the council undertakes and thinking about exactly how this strategy sits within that, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I saw a waved hand from Councillor Summers and from Altaf also. Is there anybody else wanting to, if we wouldn't mind waving a hand if you're wanting to come in on this topic? Welcome to Councillor Arshed. Okay, I will come to Altaf first, then to Councillor Dolly Summers, then to Councillor Pressel. Altaf, please.
Community facilities or the community spaces, there's quite talk about the Rose Hill and Barton and the new community facility at East Oxford. Since the pandemic, number of other community centers were shut, and I know the one or two I'm involved with, they don't even recover the cost of their gas, electric, that sort of thing. So
before you finish the whole point, sorry, can I ask, are you wanting to talk about the same point that the same point about environmental and
I'm asking question about the community space and community facilities.
In that case, do I mind if I ask you to hold that thought for a second? Okay. We'll wrap up this discussion and then talk about that. Thank you. Anybody wanting to come in on the same topic? Councillor Pressel, please.
Oh, do you want to go first? Because you're actually a member of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Susan. Yeah, I know it's similar, but a bit different. Yes, the council is doing a very good job at the moment, but it has emphasized on this document, page 53, that the pandemic has increased health, social and economic inequality between community, and that the council is going to address that. So I wondered how the council is going to address that, because it has been going on for a long time now. I've been a councillor since 2018. The only thing I can see is it's increasing. We have always been talking about this, but it's continued to increase, and it has been, a line has been shown on this further because of the pandemic and the COVID. And there are a lot of inequality between the north of Oxford and the south and east Oxford, for example, X4. So I wondered if this is all very good. I'm very interested about what the council is going to do, but sometimes I go back to my residents and they say, what is the council going to do about this? So I'm just asking you, basically. Thank you.
Does anybody want to come in on that? Any officers or Ed, I mean, sorry. Ed, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, sort of two quite wide-ranging points there. I mean, just on Nadine's one, again, I'm not sure about how much this particular strategy will necessarily help. I mean, clearly, part of it comes back to the point which Lizzie rightly identified, which is about having a sustainable income stream to support the discretionary services that we provide. And you know, my observation would be that where we provide something out of discretion, it's because we really, really care about it. So again, another example close to many of our hearts is advice provision. Most councils, after the austerity years, stopped funding advice provision, including the county. We didn't. We continue to do that, and we do it because we're able to have a budget that works involving commercial property income. We're relatively unusual these days in having a full council tax reduction scheme. Again, you know, undoubtedly, if we didn't have that in place, that would be likely to increase inequality. We do a great deal of work, which again we're not legally obliged to do. We go beyond what we legally have to do in supporting rough sleepers and so on and so forth. So partly it's about that. I suppose in terms of our other assets, some of it will be down to other strategies and how they're used. So, and this maybe segues into Altaf's point. So the detail of how we run our community centres is something which really I think the community strategy will be focused on. We talk about leisure. Clearly, there are things we do, for example, giving the free access to people in a homeless pathway in our leisure centres, or free swimming for the young people. You know, those are things where our assets play a role, but I'm not sure they'd be held in this document. And so again, I think maybe we just come back to the kind of what this document is and isn't. The question that Altaf asked to be better answered probably with reference to the emerging community strategy, and the question Nadine asked would probably in a way be a very good one with which to interrogate our corporate plan as a whole.
Councillor Pressley, you wanted to come in on
Yes,
the
I did.
topic of balancing.
If I've understood Lois correctly, I think perhaps the weighting of those different elements, it would be difficult to kind of abstract that from the document because of the way the document's laid out. If you look at the index on our page 30, for instance, I mean, they've decided, because it's such a complex mass of information, I think they've done a very good job of being really comprehensive in the report and dividing it up into fairly understandable discrete bits, if you look at the index. And I think that works well, actually, though there are some bits where I would like to see more emphasis. For instance, on biodiversity, it's good what they've said. They were talking about the parks and so on, but I think that we could do much more with our buildings when it comes to biodiversity. For instance, we should be trying to have green roofs on lots of our buildings if they've got flat roofs particularly, and most of them have, well, quite a lot of them have. And even with solar panels, you can still have a green roof, I think. So I think we should be more ambitious when it comes to biodiversity. And another one where I thought we should be more ambitious is a separate point, but can I just mention it now since I'm on a roll?
Go on then.
I think the stuff about meanwhile uses is really good and it's worked very well in the covered market, but we could possibly do more, couldn't we, about meanwhile uses in our own properties? So I just wondered if you've thought of that. And my last point, in case I'm not allowed to speak again, is I'm quite worried about the capacity of the department. Poor Jane and Mike, I know, are working incredibly hard. And there's so much in this plan and strategy that I know there's a reference to capacity. And I wondered if somebody could say a bit more about how we're going to get the capacity we need in order to fulfill all these fantastic aims. Thank you.
Ed, you want to come back on at least some of those points, and then I'll come to officers as well.
Yeah. So on biodiversity, I think the document makes reference to some other work, including a review which is ongoing. I thought the section on biodiversity here was pretty good and pretty ambitious, but Susanna makes a good point about that being very relevant to our assets as well as and our building assets as well as our parks and so on. So I mean, I think hold our feet to the fire on that when it comes to the biodiversity review, and that might be an interesting area for some discrete focused scrutiny work, even probably ranging beyond the scope of this document. On meanwhile uses, right to flag the covered market, we do have other projects on the go there. George Street springs to mind as well. Jane would have more to say, and I think actually we're also having a meeting soon with the organisation Makespace to talk about how we best work together. That being said, just to bear in mind, sometimes there's a bit of an assumption that because of the pandemic, we've got stacks and stacks of empty property just waiting to be occupied. I would refer people to the answers I gave to some questions at full council on this. In fact, our occupation levels in our own stock are pretty good. We don't have a lot of long-term voids that we don't know what to do with. Sometimes it takes a little while for something after it's become empty to come back, or sometimes someone might leave and then we need to take legal measures to get a property back. But we've not got just lots of sort of shops, for example, sitting empty. But where we do have a situation where there's a possibility of meanwhile use, we're absolutely up for that. So the covered market is a really, really good example. And on capacity, Jane will probably want to add something on this. I think this area of the council is really, really stretched. And I've said to officers who will sometimes find themselves being pulled in different directions, sometimes whisper it by elected members who've got a particularly thorny asset issue in their ward they need to deal with, that if needs be, if officers are finding it impossible to deal with some of the really big ticket items, in particular if it would jeopardise our income streams, then they need to push back. And if needs to be, as a cabinet member, I'd expect to be looped in and to help with that, because what we can't do is drop the ball on some of these really big picture challenges. And again, just another example which might interest people. Quite often I find myself being approached by residents about whether we can sell small plots of land adjacent to their houses so they can become part of private gardens. The amount of work involved in that sort of transaction, it tends to be very significant, and so we tend actually to push back, and that's that's partly because of just the capacity versus the gain. We can't do everything, and of course, if members don't like that, and members say, well, no, we ought to be operating, a bigger whistles and bells service, then that's something which members would need to own and take account of at budget time. But I think it's a really important point about capacity, and we do need to focus on the important things. Jane may have further reflections. I doubt they'll be very different.
No, my overarching reflections are not very different. But I thought that the example of green roofs and the like was a really a good example of how this strategy allows us to look, in a more granular way. And in fact, that would flow out of the plan that sits below this. And as it happens, we are working across a number of departments, with environmental sustainability and with planning colleagues to look at things like biodiversity, like green roofs, like carbon reduction, like electric charging, and they stem out from the plan that sits underneath this. As far as capacity is concerned, I think you summed that up very well. But we are actually running at the minute on a couple of vacant posts that we're looking to recruit to. But yeah, we do get bogged down in minutiae at times.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hunt, can I ask whether you want to talk on the same topic or a different one? Okay, on the same topic, please.
Yeah, it was really just following on, particularly from Councillor Muddiman's points. I mean, my sense is, my reading of it was that it's a very broad brushstrokes document. And actually, now that Susanna Pressel and Councillor Muddiman have actually talked about reviewing it in terms of detail to reflect where we are environmentally, I do think it could do with that, because, if we're talking about aspects of energy security now is something that we're very, very concerned about. And everything now has to be looked at in terms of solar, more and more so. My other issue certainly is with biodiversity, which I think affects absolutely everything now, and growth. I mean, what I'm unsure about is where this talk, which we must now embrace, of a circular economy, where that fits within this document. So what we know is that a number of local authorities are running all their policy documents through the circular economy model, donut economics, the idea that we've hit now, these planetary boundaries. We cannot keep growing. Growth has been redefined. And, is that now something that is going to be looked at in Oxford with all the experts that we have here beyond our council team to go into a document like this, which I think is crucial. And, the key to this is certainly, obviously, how the council runs its finances when it's utterly dependent on the Oxford model, which is growth on all of our green spaces, as far as I understand as a new councillor, and how we're actually then going to reconcile that, how we're going to square this need for income from growth with the fact that we have finite resources and we cannot keep building on our green spaces. So I do think, I'm asking, should this be in this document, because I'm not seeing it here.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Jarvis's comments, and then I'll come back to Ed and the officers, and then look to wrap up on the topic.
I've got one very specific point on the biodiversity question, then another separate specific point. Shall I hold the second one? Or
if it's a totally different topic, then yeah, let's come to it.
So just specifically on the biodiversity, I think the comments from Susanna Pressel, I think were really, really helpful in kind of bringing to life something that I was thinking when reading this document, which is in the biodiversity section in particular, the talk is all about conserving biodiversity in the asset management strategy rather than enhancing and strengthening biodiversity. And I don't think it's a pedantic linguistic thing. I think there is a clear difference between strengthening and enhancing and conserving, and the sorts of things that Susanna was talking about I think would be better reflected with a change in wording and emphasis around enhancing and strengthening.
That's very encouraging, because I was just thinking to myself, I'm struggling to think how this turns into a concrete recommendation, and that sounds an awful lot like a concrete recommendation. So thank you very much for the contribution. Right, I will come to Ed and the officers one last time, and then I suggest we should try and put this into a recommendation and move along. Ed, you want to come in?
Yeah, I do. The recommendation seems fine. I think, in fairness, the reason the document uses the language that it does is that it talks about legal obligations, which we would need in any case to take into account with our asset base. And I think the language there is about conserving, but you know, I mean, absolutely, of course we want to enhance biodiversity, and I'm sure we could find a good way of taking on board such a recommendation. In terms of energy, I mean, very obviously, as a council, we will be doing an awful lot in the energy space in the coming years. You know, and as my recent report to Cabinet set out, we're in a position where we face starkly rising utility bills. So there's an economic driver as well as a carbon reduction driver to that. Our low carbon team has been incredibly hardworking, and of course we've had the decarbonisation work in our leisure centres, which is an important contribution. But clearly, this is an area which isn't going to wait, and we will keep looking at that. I think given since this journey started, the energy issues have been brought into much sharper relief. What will probably happen is that in the document sitting underneath this, we'll have a bit more about energy, and of course also all of the emerging work on low carbon and climate goals will again take that forward as well. So clearly, I suppose what I would discourage anyone from doing is thinking there's not fantastic amounts about energy specifically in this document, therefore it's not important. I think it's just about what the purpose of this document is. On the Oxford model, I have to say I don't recognise Jemima's account of that. I think the Oxford model is to a significant degree about capturing for public benefit a return from work which might well otherwise be done for private commercial gains, so about insourcing work. So to take a couple of examples, if you have a housing site which is allocated in our local plan, that might be brought forward by a commercial house builder, and then that commercial house builder's shareholders would get a return, or it might be brought forward by our own local housing company, and then that local housing company delivers a return to people in Oxford and of course supports those discretionary services. Or alternatively, Oxford's rec services will do buildings maintenance work, or will do work on, for example, repair work, or will do highways work, which otherwise would be done by a company for private commercial gain. So I think it's not particularly about growth that this is about. Instead, it's about insourcing so that we capture public benefit from that sort of work which is done.
Thank you.
Can I make one more point as part of a recommendation,
okay,
which would be that there's only one reference to climate resilience in the document, and given the extreme weather conditions that we've just all experienced and that we expect there to be far more to come, I think there should be more emphasis. At the moment, there's one reference on page 72. And I think in the future, we're going to be needing to be providing cooling centres and warming centres for the population of Oxford during some of these extreme weather patterns. So could that be part of the recommendation, that there's more emphasis on that?
Okay, in that case, summing up or attempting to do so, how about something along the lines of that going forwards in describing our asset management strategy, we ensure that the opportunities to enhance the environment in general and biodiversity in particular are drawn out. And I think probably perhaps as a separate thing, because it's less of a sort of a matter of sort of capital gain, if you like, but not economic capital, but it's more of a practical consideration, is that climate resilience as a topic is addressed. Perhaps could be a separate recommendation to that one as something of a parallel topic. Does that sound okay? People seem to be nodding. Okay, right, fine. We'll try and put some more precise wording on that. Altaf, it feels like about half an hour ago that you made half a point about community centres and then got an answer from Ed anyway.
I'm not about the community centre strategy. I'm talking about the community centre as a building assets which are sitting empty, which are not doing well. And only I said about 2-3 Barton, Roselle with the council assistant, and there's a talk about the new community center in this strategy, the East Oxford. I do strongly think the council need to look at how these assets can be more sort of income generating for the council, not as the traditional community centers, which were not really feasible after this COVID, unless there is a full council support behind it, or like a council running it in a way. So I'm talking about the community centers assets as a buildings. And second point on that, as a building of as over assets, these estate shops is talks in this strategy, and is talk about the competition as well. I think is a commercial side, if they are let on a commercial basis and commercial rent, and council have less interference of who can sell the crisp or sweet or chocolate, then you can have more rental income from those commercial places. I do understand the point. Some of the commercial lets struggling in the city centers, and city centers traditionally being a high rental, and due to the COVID effects, there is some impact on the council. So we got to look at different ways of the estate shops as a commercials let, and those community centers are sitting in a way and very little things happening. So we could look at different model, like Green Square built this new place and they're charging rent, and obviously that rent will pay off what they spent. So similar sort of things can be looked at, and then given a long lease to community association, and that rental income will pay off. So I think those, and I'm not talking anything which is not in this document. And I final my point, I don't honestly like, and I hate, and I'm very angry about this, and I will say it here right now. If there is a councillor who is from the administration and keep praising and say, oh, law, we're doing very good, and then the cabinet member is happy, and there's a little point, I address that point, and is very good point. And if there is a opposition councillor asking some sticky questions, then saying like a buck passing, oh no, this strategy doesn't deal with this, that strategy deal with it. Everything I ask, it is written in this document. Either you remove all those things from this document, and I will not talk about it, or be prepared to talk about this, please, and don't buck pass it.
Okay. Ed, you'd like to respond?
Yeah, I will, Chair. I have to say, if those last points were directed at me, I find it a little bit unfair. I've tried to engage in a constructive way with the discussion and provide reasonable answers to people's questions, regardless of what political party they belong to. But there we go. So with two bits there around community centres. I don't recognise contention. Not much is happening in many community centres, and were that so, that would absolutely be something for the community strategy. We have a range of different models. So some of the community centres are run, for example, Rose Hill is run directly by the council. So there we have a very immediate lever. In other cases, there are leases on different terms to community associations. And in some cases, indeed, there's a good degree of security associated with those. And also, I think there's a policy choice, which is that often we would choose to give community associations the space to run community centres, as they choose, provided they're in line with the objectives set out in whatever lease they've got. And that means, for example, they would be choosing about levels of charging for groups. That wouldn't be for the council to dictate. We've also got a situation. Anyway, maybe there's again a limit to what we can or would seek to dictate on this. Where this strategy, of course, needs to focuses on things like the maintenance of the buildings, which is important, and the overall shape of the portfolio. And as the councillor rightly observed, we're, for example, we're going to rebuild East Oxford, which should give us a much better asset. What we don't want to do is have assets that are, where large parts of them are not usable, and which where you end up just constantly patching them up, but they're not really fit for purpose. In terms as well of the income generation potential, where we run them directly, absolutely, that's something we should seek to do. And when full council agrees the charges in our own community centres that we run, and other buildings that we run directly, then we tend to have a tiered approach. So we charge more money for commercial uses than we do for community ones. I'm not sure we could be very successful if we try to leverage a lot more income from community associations. So if we offered for people to pay us a lot more money for the benefit of running a community centre, I think that would be difficult. But if there is something there, we'd be glad to look at it. On the estate shops, I'm not sure I fully understood the point. I mean, what's in the document here is a recognition that the estate shops serve a really useful purpose. They do also bring us an income return. The costs of the costs of running the leases, running that bit of our portfolio, are quite high. I think the document, is right to observe that in the pandemic, sometimes the estate shops really came into their own. I think one point Altaf was raising was about restrictions on what people can and can't sell and what might happen. And I think there's a couple of ways in which one could take that. One is that, as I understand it, in some cases, you try to avoid having a new kid on the block threatening an existing business. So, for example, if you have invested money running a small supermarket, then we will potentially not permit a very similar business to open up next door, because it could lead to them both collapsing. Jana might be able to say a little bit more about the kind of rationale there. But of course, also there's something about the balance. And I think, in all of this, there is a balance. Personally, I wouldn't want something which is completely led by the market for our estate shops. For example, if there was a wave of people opening up bookmakers or things that weren't socially useful in the estate shops, I think that would be worth resisting. And instead, we just need to make sure that they are serving the socially useful purpose that we intend for them.
Thank you, Ed. Altaf, can I ask you to briefly clarify, was that the topic you were getting at? Because I know I saw in the report some words on the topic of, I think what you're calling socially useful. It was talking about, for example, trying to avoid ranks of estate shops becoming entirely takeaways, things of that sort. Altaf, is that the sort of topic you were getting at, or were you thinking of something different there?
Yeah, takeaways are not antisocial. So, and what I was trying to say, that if it's a commercial let, and if they are commercially let on commercial rent, then I think there should be a less, unless obviously if there are more takeaway, they have to go through the planning process. And if there are planning doesn't go through, they won't get it. So that sort of things, these are details, but general point was, if they are let on commercial basis, so you can get the commercial income. And also, I think I'd also accept and said this about the community center, that community strategy, which deals with certain things, and he does admit that this strategy deal with the buildings. And this is what I was talking, there are buildings which are completely run down buildings.
Thank you. Okay, there's a few waving hands in the room here, so I'll take comments from Nadine, and then from Lubna, and then from Ed, please, and then let's come back to other Ed in the offices.
I'm just going to be very quick. It's about the recommendation, actually. The recommendation you just started talking about, right? I just wanted for this consultation to go to the stakeholders in the community, such as the parish council forums, and I want this in the recommendation, and as well that this documentation is made in a kind of more user-friendly manner, kind of with less opaque kind of speech or writing, because nobody would understand. It has to be made available to everybody so that everybody can understand and make up their mind. Thank you.
Okay, I feel slightly as if I've fallen through a time hole. I'm going to assume that hasn't happened. I'll take Lubna's comments and then Ed Mundy's comment, please.
Thank you. This is a question for Ed. Do you know if this is the right place to speak about the leisure facilities with regards to provision or not?
Mark, you had a comment, sorry?
No, it isn't, but I'm more than happy to talk to you after the meeting. Thank you.
Ed Mundy.
Yeah, so in relation to the consultation, only receiving obviously one response, and we had some pretty considerable controversy around the East Oxford Community Centre. I think that's a case that really shows how important it is to engage more widely, and that may go beyond just parish councils, but also community associations. I did have a separate point as well. Okay, yeah, so around investments. So this was a few months ago, I attended a meeting where officers of the council didn't appear to be very aware of ethical investing and whether that was something that our council was actually truly engaged with. So, you know, especially in relation to zero carbon Oxford, for example, we'd want to make sure that we weren't, you know, in business with or investing in companies that were obviously profiting from fossil fuel usage, but also it could come to, in terms of thriving communities, it could come to things like companies that are making profits out of border control and border violence. So I'd just like that to be sort of taken on board as something we may consider as a recommendation potentially for in terms of investments. A couple of minor things. Okay, so corporate asset strategy 711 built on waterways. It says the River Thames and then minor backwaters and streams. Shouldn't we mention the Cherwell, which is obviously a major river? I don't think it would be very happy if it was only called a backwater. And then Appendix B, Asset Review Group. It says corporate priorities, but I'm pretty sure that means corporate priorities, just to point that out. Thanks.
On the typo, you've definitely gone too fast for me, but could I ask you to follow up by email with the report author? I think would be the best thing for the typo, and probably also for mentioning the Cherwell if it is just a case of drafting. Which has made me forget the first point, but I'll come back to that in just a second. First, though, I'd like to sort of just briefly wrap up on the matter of community centres and so on. Ed Turner, you've got a hand up, so I'll come to you next, and then I'll try and wrap up this thing on the topic of community centres and shops that we were discussing a moment ago. Ed Turner, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. So I think there were 4 different things, at least, or 4 different people who mentioned things there. So at this point, I do understand it. And I mean, there is a choice. And if Scrutiny wants to recommend that we take away the policy around takeaways and not encouraging their growth, you know, fair enough, that would be a view. It's not one I particularly welcome. But you know, and in the past, certainly, I think there's been a sort of public health argument to suggest we shouldn't be doing that, and we shouldn't be looking to have more takeaways in the estate shops. But I appreciate other people might take a different view. Nadine, on the consultation, I'd understood the discussion previously as being about what we do next time. You know, this has already been to cabinet and then been out to consultation. I think it'd be. I don't think we'd be expecting to go out and have another go. And I think instead we bear in mind the feedback from you know, from the committee as we consult on other documents in the future and in future iterations of this one. You know, and I have to say, if people felt that strongly, having reviewed the cabinet papers first time around, you know, probably that would have been the moment then to prompt us and say, you know, this should have gone a bit more widely. But you know, understand people might reach a different view. In terms of leisure facilities, this is not going to provide a blueprint for new or existing leisure facilities. I think that would really be the job. Obviously, there's a conversation about the management of our leisure facilities as the fusion contract comes towards an end, and Cheve is leading on that. And we certainly need to look at, you know, we would always look at the shape of our portfolio. I wouldn't expect a lot of things to change. So this wouldn't be the blueprint where you'd say we will build the new thing here, or we would have fewer things there. And then on East Oxford Community Centre, the point Edward made about consultation, Point understood. Again, I think that would probably go in the same place. That would probably be, unless this document is taking a decision about a particular facility, then what you do is look to engage people, as did happen extensively with that project, in consultation about the individual scheme rather than the high-level corporate document. I'm sorry if officers weren't across ethical investment. We do have an ethical investment policy within our treasury management strategy that governs that, and really happy to look at that. And in fact, we are looking at expanding that as part of our next review of the treasury management strategy. That was set out in the relevant cabinet paper and agreed by council last time. And the points about Cherwell not being a backwater and about priorities, not priories. We do own an asset called the Priory, and it's something of a headache, but that's a different story. That's all well taken.
Do you own more than one? Enough to have priories. Anyway, sorry. Not the place for bad jokes, I'm sure. I would like to, first of all, briefly come back to Ed Mundy to ask whether you're sort of satisfied with the response you got there, whether there's anything you're wanting to push in the direction of a recommendation, or whether you're satisfied by what you've heard just now.
So, I mean, are we recommending an expanding of the consultation process being much more open? Is that part of a recommendation that we're putting forward?
So, yes, certainly, as we previously described it, was well, I think we'd specifically described involving parish councils, community councils, parish council forums, community associations. So if you consider that to be sufficient recommendation, good. Okay, next I'd like to wrap up the topic that we were previously on about estate shops. Personally, I also consider it interesting in the sense that it's a policy which it's foregoing some amount of sort of rental income. Obviously, it's doing that at a time when we're very pressed in terms of income of all kinds, and it's sort of attempting some sort of gentle, benign social engineering in terms of trying to encourage the sort of the right mix of shops. So obviously, if we were to recommend as a committee, oh, you should not have that policy, I think I can predict the response that we're going to get. What might be a little bit more nuanced and perhaps interesting to know would be whether we have a assessment of how much income we're foregoing in that respect. To what degree is that policy impacting the bottom line, or is it actually something which is having fairly marginal impact, because the sort of the second best, if you like, in a purely monetary sense, is actually quite close to the sort of the takeaway that you might not wish to occupy, to make it a 3 out of 3 takeaways on a particular rank, that kind of thing. I don't know whether that's something that to what degree we're foregoing income is something people have to mind. If we don't, I might be inclined to suggest as a recommendation that is something we should seek to know and to write about. Can I ask if either the officers or Ed have any comments on that? Ms. Winfield, please.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the overall scheme of things, the sort of uses like takeaways will typically outbid some other uses that might be seen to have more social value for the community. But in the grand scheme of things, it's sort of fiddling around the edges a little bit. The estate shops, they provide us an income stream, but not as much as some of our city centre assets. So for me, I think my personal view is it's very important that we get the balance right. The amount of additional income you will be making to have, say, 7 estate shops with 7 takeaways in them, to me feels that just wouldn't be the right balance.
Can I ask to be fully concrete? When you say about fiddling around the edges, are you saying this is? So I guess the event I'm thinking of is somebody approaches you with intent to let a unit, and your decision is for social reasons we don't consider that the right thing. A, is that something that happens frequently, rarely? And B, when it does happen, are we talking, we're sort of sacrificing 10% of the rental income to go to the second choice? Are we sacrificing 50%? What's the sort of scale there?
On the estate shops, I would say it happens relatively rarely. And when it does, it's 10%, I would say, or less. But that's not to say that the market it's evolving post-pandemic, and we are seeing different types of users starting to approach us. So just because that's happening now doesn't mean that it won't be happening, a lot more in the future.
Thank you. That's a very useful response. So in terms of sort of putting the Altaf, I'll take Altaf briefly, and then I'll try and sum up.
I just wanted to clarify this point, that I didn't mean that I wanted all takeaways. What I wanted to say, they are commercial lets, and for the commercial rent to come in, we should be less sort of directive to what should it come or shouldn't come, because there are some loads of examples I can go through. Somebody can take a unit and say council is satisfied that socially is fine, but that because it's a low rent, these state shops, and that person will shut the unit for a year, 2 years, and will pay the rent. So there are shut units in the state shops. There are some other things which council getting rent, but is what I'm saying is if it's like open market or commercial rent, you will get more money. And there may be variety of things coming, and those variety of things may have different restriction at different stages. As we said, the A3 might be restricted by the plannings, so they might not get planning through.
Jane, you want to reply?
Yeah, I think we need to be really clear that we are talking about open market lettings here in the estate shops. This is not something that we don't go to the market on, so they are open market lettings. And we have, I should also add that we have relatively few voids in the estate shops. And a number of the voids where historically they've been where units are up for assignment rather than new letting. So we don't actually control that vacancy.
Councillor Hunt, are you wanting to talk on the same topic? Otherwise, I'd like to try and sum this discussion up.
Yeah, it was just to add to the leisure and community facilities discussion, and just to say that I do feel there could be much more. There could be, it would be nice to include more about swimming. I feel that swimming is very undersupported, underutilized in this city. Ultimately, it'd be great to have a consultation going out about swimming. Having just come back from France, their municipal swimming pools are open till 9 o'clock at night. I'm just going to finish because I don't come to Scrutiny. It's impossible to get into the Hinksey Lido at the moment. And secondly, the reservoir next to the Hinksey Lido, which I'm assuming is owned by the council. Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I assume it is.
It's leased out on a long lease, so we haven't got total immediate control of it.
You couldn't make revenue from that for the council. Sorry? Why not? Why can't we clean it like they do in Europe?
It would entail digging out all of the land under it and all the land in Hinksey Park, because it was used for industrial purposes.
Could I'll put things back on the rails now, please,
anyway,
if I
I'm
can.
just saying this is something I feel is actually not supported properly by the council and could be.
Okay, thank you. Right, on the estate shops, could I propose a recommendation along the lines of the question that I asked, just because I thought that the answer was from Jane was very informative and useful, and it's something which I think we should set down in black and white, basically. It is essentially that we should report formally what Jane has just reported informally, which is that with regards to the policy of selecting lessors of retail units for social reasons, the degree, frequency with which that results in picking the those other than the top bidder, and by how much, essentially just setting out what is the level of financial impact of that, as a useful thing for people to know, that when they read about that policy, actually what sort of magnitude are we talking about? I phrased that a little bit muddily. I hope people are basically on board with what I'm saying. Are people happy with a recommendation along those lines? Does anybody want to comment on that? I see some nodding heads and an agreed from Councillor Ligo. So if nobody else objects, then I will like us to make that recommendation. Right. Okay. Don't think I have anybody else in my sort of my queue of people waving hands at me. Sorry, Councillor Jarvis, please.
Yeah, sorry, my second point is incredibly specific, and it relates to something on page 72 of the document, which I was quite surprised to see in there, and I wondered if we get some clarification on it, which is that, I'll read it out. The document says, the council will encourage lower carbon access to the city centre, e.g. free parking at park and ride sites. And I was quite surprised to see free parking at park and rides within the document. And I wanted if we get some clarity on why that's in there, given that it's more likely to encourage car use rather than reduce it, and the financial impact it could have on the council.
Any comments from Ed or from the officers? Councillor Turner, please.
Yeah, I suppose I understood. So I think the phrase in question is about lower carbon access to the city centre, and clearly if people use a park and ride and then use public transport, then it is a lower carbon way of accessing the city centre than driving in and parking in the city centre. But obviously it is a higher carbon way of accessing the city centre than going your whole journey on public transport. Rather than launching into a lengthy debate about that, I suggest, I'm sure we can tweak the wording. And of course also there are all sorts of things which we're doing, which I'd readily concede probably this doesn't do justice to support much lower carbon and indeed zero carbon ways of accessing the city centre. So I think why don't we just take that point on board, and we'll change the wording so that although I'm sure you could defend what's written here, and we can probably make it capture the point much better.
Mike.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, I agree with what Ed's saying there, that I think what we did with this document, and this was picked up from the various teams and pieces of work that are underway across the council. I don't think it's saying this is what we're going to do. It's just one of the not many options that has been thrown in. And I think, yeah, we can probably soften the words. There are a multitude of options that we need to consider to bring about lower carbon access. And I think that's what we were trying to get across. So I think it's just probably in the wording, it's not as clear as it should be.
And to be clear, as far as I'm aware, it's not currently council policy to have free parking at park and rides. So no. It perhaps read a little bit as if the document is making policy. And so far as I'm aware, that's not what was intended. If anyone can't see, there's a nod from Ed there. A hand from Ed Mundy.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, perhaps it's more to the point as free buses rather than free parking. Maybe that's kind of what it's getting at.
That was my understanding of cabinet policy, though obviously I probably shouldn't be the one holding forth on exactly what the cabinet thinks. Sorry, Ed Turner.
Yeah, I mean, for completeness, where we are on park and ride is as negotiated with the county and the bus companies. We faced a situation where the park and rides would become almost unviable because the bus companies wouldn't have been able to operate the services to them commercially. But in order to increase take-up, we've got this new joint ticketing arrangement and change charges, which we've been able to agree, as I say, with the bus companies and the council. And what I really hope is that means that we prevent what would otherwise happen, which is lots more people driving into the city centre because there is no viable bus service to the park and ride. frankly, anyone who's been following local government finances or things like inflationary pressures will know that we're really not going to be in a position to go and just make everything free, and that just can't be our ambition. Of course, it can't.
Thank you. Okay, I had a couple of things that I wanted to raise myself, and then I'll make one last go around the room, and then we should probably move along to our other agenda items. So first of all, a small thing is we have the review of the previous asset management plan and the report back on the goals there. I hope it'd be an uncontroversial recommendation to say that wherever there are numerical goals, can we report the actual outcome, whereas there were some cases where there are numerical goals and it just reports either met or not met. So for example, I can't remember exactly what it was measuring, but there was something there that said target was greater than 40%, outcome was greater than 40%. And so obviously my thought is, so what, 40.1 or 80? If people are happy that that is a fairly uncontroversial thing to just ask that where we have the actual number, could we please report that in the course of reporting the actual outcome against a numerical target? People happy with that as an idea? I see nodding of heads, good. And then a bigger ticket item, which I'd be interested to hear comment on, is there's the section where we talk about our exposure to different sectors, and there was a ominous pie chart in there showing sort of 75% exposure to specifically retail, and then the other 25% is made up of a lot of small segments of other kinds of usage. What it does, so obviously that's sort of a lesson learned taken on the back of COVID sort of hit retail unusually hard, and it's and the report's talking about thinking about whether we want to diversify a little bit there. It doesn't talk about whether we take anything away from that in terms of the balance between property investment and non-property investment. Is that something which a view has been taken on in the wake of COVID, or indeed anything else that impacts the yields from our property investments, and if so, what in what direction? Councillor Turner.
Thanks. Can probably help a bit with both of those points, and be assured, Chair, that they're things which are absolutely at the forefront of our consideration, and they'll just have to stay that way. So on the first thing about diversification, it would be much better if we were more diverse, I think. That's not always easy to achieve, because particularly at the moment, if you just look to offload lots of retail, then you'd be having a bit of a fire sale, and that wouldn't be to your benefit. And so one way of doing that is by growing our asset base in other sectors. And so in the budget the council agreed last time, for example, we agreed some money for regeneration. I wouldn't expect that to be retail focused. I'd expect that that investment to deliver a return from other areas. Also, I think it's fair to say that as part of our budget preparations, Office has been working really hard looking at our portfolio and seeing whether there are any bits which we shouldn't be keeping, which we currently hold. But as I say, that it's not as easy as flicking a switch, both because of the nature of people's occupation, and also the fact that now would not be a great time to be flogging retail properties. But it would be much better if our portfolio was more diverse, and we'd like to achieve that. Sorry, what was the second point, Chris? Forgive me.
The second point is about property versus other classes of investment, and whether we seek to diversify outside of property as well, or are we looking to maintain roughly the same size stake just within different types of property?
Okay, gotcha. So, I mean, again, that would probably be more something for the council's MTFS and indeed Treasury management strategy. And there are different. So again, we have different types of property investments as well. So around our Treasury portfolio, we've got investments in funds which hold property outside Oxford, And those have performed pretty well. And actually, we've slightly increased the amount of investment going into those over the years as a reflection of that. And if we divested in those and just put money in the bank, then that would be a significant hit to the MTFS. We are though also on the lookout for other potential channels. And for example, we recently made the investment that people will be aware of in the Ray Valley solar farm. And that was a good example of where we could use our money to deliver a financial and an environmental benefit. And that's something which we'll certainly continue to do. And then there is, I think, if I think back to the council's most recent budget debate, there was a question about whether we should be investing in property regeneration or in other things. And I think, although we passed the budget as a council as was proposed, we expressed an openness to looking at that and keeping it continually under review. So not for this document, but absolutely open to those, to investing in other sectors where where we can and where it's financially right to do so. Jane may have some other sort of bits to add to that.
No, I can only agree with you on that. I think you summed that up fine.
Okay, thank you very much. I will happily revisit this in the context of the broader budget, but it's interesting to hear where you are on the topic. Okay, I'm aware that time is ticking away, and that when the scrutiny agenda is short, then the individual items expand to fill the available patience of those present. So we should probably be looking to draw towards a close. Is there anybody who feels they have a burning item that we have missed out? Sorry, what was that? Okay. All right, sorry. Cool, okay, fine. Is there anybody wanting to come in on anything? If not, then I suggest we should draw the item to a close. Thank Jane and Mike very much indeed for their time, and Councillor Turner for his time also. Thank you very much indeed, and we'll move on to talking about reports back on recommendations and from standing panels. Thank you all three of you. Okay, so reports back on, sorry, this is the point where if they were there physically, I'd say you can go or hang around. They have indeed gone. Right. Reports back on recommendations from standing panels. And Altaf is out of here too. I'd better wrap up before I lose the entire committee. So we've had some reports back from various matters that have gone to Cabinet. We have reports relating to the Housing and Homelessness Panel made a total of 19 recommendations that have got detailed responses from Cabinet. Which I will, given their number, I'll leave people to visit in the agenda pack. There was a report back from the companies panel, which I saw Councillor Rowley sent a email about, which I'm afraid I haven't had time to read because it arrived during work this afternoon. Can I just ask you to sum it up briefly? Would that be okay?
Sure. It was simply to say there have been two meetings of the shareholder group, both of which were attended. My apologies to the committee for unavoidably not being able to go to the meeting on the 28th, but thanks to James and Alistair for filling in. We made a number of points. Scrutiny members made a number of points which were taken on board. We made no formal recommendations, partly because the actual items up for discussion weren't particularly exciting, but there are general topics that will bear watching, I think, by scrutiny. Are the on ODS, the future of their contributions to the City Council's bottom line. They have fortunately been able to make 600k contribution, and there is 1.068 million, not 1.068k, as was unfortunately minuted in the shareholder group minutes, but at the end, coming at the end of the year. But there are ambitious and escalating targets. So the panel and perhaps at some point the whole scrutiny committee will want to keep a close eye on ODS's business plan. And what the hell was the other thing? Sorry. I do apologize. Balance between. Oh yeah, but also this was not something that was discussed at the shareholder meeting, but is something that I'm well aware of, and I'm sure many colleagues also are aware of. That ODS is seeking to has had some success in expanding its commercial portfolio, and scrutiny, the company's panel and itself will, and scrutiny committee may at some future point wish to consider how it's doing in striking a balance between making an income for the council that way and keeping good quality local services delivered in Oxford, which is the core function of ODS. I will stop burbling on there.
Thank you very much. And can I hand over to Alice relating to the finance and performance panels meeting, please?
Yeah, thank you. So just to say that the finance and performance panel met for the first time this year on the 7th of July. They considered the medium-term financial strategy and their scrutiny commission performance monitoring for the coming municipal year. They didn't make any recommendations, but just to note that they met recently.
Thank you. And I will note that that the main scrutiny committee has had responses back relating to the safeguarding report, the EV infrastructure strategy, and the growth fund cycle routes, all of which were talked about last meeting. I think it was last meeting, and also about the waterways scrutiny commissioned work that was from 2 meetings ago. The responses from those are broadly very positive. There was one negative that jumped out to me in the EV infrastructure strategy, and that was with regards to the projections as to EV uptake. I think that's something where, since it's a matter of fact, we'll just have to revisit that in future years. I shall place on record that I'll be very surprised if the projected numbers come true as written. But I can say I told you so in a couple of years, I suppose, since the first one of those projections comes true or not in 2026. All right. Think that's everything that I've got on the agenda relating to reports back. So then it remains only to note the dates of future meetings. So a reminder that there's an extraordinary scrutiny committee meeting on the 27th of September, and that's relating to the Oxfordshire 2050 plan. So obviously a fairly big deal. Look forward to a marathon of exactly these sorts of proportions. And then there's also regular scrutiny, and I'll remind myself of that one. 5th of September, 5th or 6th? 6th of September, we shall have regular scrutiny after everybody has come back from their summer vacations. And I think that's it. Unless anybody has anything to say at this juncture, then I shall draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all very much indeed for coming. Have a lovely evening.